The most terrifying thing about shadow work isn't confronting your darkness. It's watching your old self die. Have you ever noticed how we spend years building versions of ourselves, polishing our personas until they gleam like armor, only to discover that beneath all that careful construction lies a stranger, someone raw, unfiltered, and devastatingly real? Shadow work doesn't just reveal who you are beneath the mask. It systematically dismantles every comfortable lie you've told yourself about who you think you should be. This isn't therapy. This isn't with self-help. This is psychological archaeology, and what you'll unearth will change everything. Because shadow work does not improve your life. It ends the life you thought you were living and births something entirely new. Let me tell you why this destruction is the most sacred thing you'll ever do. Carl Jung understood something most people refuse to face. We are not who we think we are. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, and he wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. The shadow, that repository of everything we'd be rejected, denied, and pushed into the unconscious, isn't just a psychological concept. It has the graveyard of your authentic self. Think about it. From the moment you learned to say please and thank you, you began the process of self-editing. Every time someone frowned at your anger, dismissed your sadness, or praised you for being good, you made an unconscious decision. Parts of me are acceptable, parts of me are not. The unacceptable parts didn't disappear, they went underground, forming what Jung called the shadow. But here's what most people miss about shadow work. It's not about integrating your darkness so you can be a better person. That is still playing the old game of self-improvement. Shadow work is about recognizing that the person you've been trying to improve is a fiction. The humor that exists in daylight, the one that shows up to work and smiles at neighbors and maintains relationships. That is not your true self. That's your persona, your social mask, and it's been running the show for so long you've forgotten it's just a costume. Nietzsche saw this clearly when he wrote about the need to become who you are. Not who you should be, not who others want you to be, but who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. This is why shadow work feels like dying, because something does die. The constructed self, the one built from external expectations and internal fears, has to dissolve for the authentic self to emerge. The process is alchemical in the truest sense. In medieval alchemy, the first stage was called nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction of base matter before it could be transformed into gold. The alchemists understood that creation requires destruction, that you cannot build the new upon the foundations of the old. You have to let everything rot first. This is why shadow work is so different from conventional therapy or personal development. Those approaches assume there's a healthy self that just needs adjustment, like a car that needs a tune-up. Shadow work assumes the car is stolen. It asks, not, how can I fix myself? But, who am I when I stop trying to be anyone? A boss. The terror comes from recognizing how much of your identity is borrowed, how many of your beliefs aren't actually yours, how much of your personality is just sophisticated people-pleasing. When you start pulling at these threads, whole sections of your self-concept unravel. Relationships that seemed solid reveal themselves as contracts based on mutual performance. Career paths that felt like callings expose themselves as escapes from who you really are. But underneath all that collapse, underneath the rubble of the false self, something ancient and unshakable begins to stir. Not the you that was created by circumstances, but the you that was never touched by them. The self with a capital S, the irreducible core that was there before you learned to be anyone else. Sarah thought she had her life figured out. Marketing executive, 2-bedroom apartment in the city, a relationship that looked good on Instagram. She was the friend people came to for advice, the daughter who never caused drama, the employee who stayed late without being asked. She had spent 32 years perfecting the art of being acceptable. The breakdown started small, a comment from her boss about her passive communication style that lodged itself in her chest like a splinter. Then her boyfriend mentioning almost casually that he sometimes felt like he was dating a ghost. You're always so agreeable," he said. "I never know what you actually want." What she wanted? The question haunted her. When was the last time she had wanted something that was first filtered through the question of whether it was appropriate, whether it would disappoint someone, whether it was the kind of thing a good person should want? That night, Sarah found herself journaling for the first time in years. Not the gratitude journaling she'd tried before, but something rawer. She wrote about the rage she felt when her mother called with unsolicited advice, the envy that poisoned her when friends got promotions she never even asked for, the way she performed happiness so convincingly that she'd forgotten what actual joy felt like. The words that came out were ugly, bitter, nothing like the composed, thoughtful person she'd trained herself to be. And for the first time in decades, they felt completely true. Shadow work became her secret rebellion. In therapy sessions, she stopped performing recovery and started excavating the parts of herself she buried alive. The part that was furious at her parents for raising her to be convenient rather than real. The part that resented friends who got to be messy while she stayed stable. The part that had opinions so strong they scared her. The old Sarah would have called in sick when she felt this unstable. The emerging Sarah showed up to work anyway, but differently. She stopped volunteering for projects that excited no one. She started saying no to drinks when she wanted to go home. She had an argument with her boyfriend, their first real fight in 3 years, and discovered that conflict didn't destroy love. It revealed it. 6 months later, her life looked chaos compared to the neat story she'd been telling. Her relationship had ended not from lack of love, but from the recognition that they'd been dating each other masks. She changed jobs, not climbing the ladder, but jumping to something that actually engaged her. Some friends drifted away, apparently more attached to her supportive role than to her as a person. But for the first time, Sarah felt like she was inhabiting her own life instead of just managing it. The alchemists knew something our productivity-obsessed culture has forgotten. Transformation is not improvement. It is death and rebirth, dissolution and reconstitution. In the ancient texts, they called this process solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, break down the old form so completely that something entirely new can emerge. This is why shadow work feels like madness. You are literally dissolving the psychological structures that have held your identity together. The persona, that carefully crafted public self, begins to crack and crumble. The old defense mechanisms stop working. The stories you'd have told yourself about who you are and why you do what you do start falling apart. In alchemical terms, you are entering the nigredo, the black phase where everything rots. It is supposed to feel like dying because something is dying. The false self, the adapted self, the self that was built to survive rather than to live, all of it has to compost before the authentic self can take root. But here is the secret the alchemists understood. This destruction is not random. It is not a breakdown. It is a controlled demolition. Your psyche knows exactly what needs to go and what needs to stay. The shadow doesn't just contain your darkness. It contains your disowned light, your unexpressed creativity, your unlived life. As you integrate these lost parts, they don't just join your personality, they revolutionize it. The end result isn't a better version of who you were. It is a completely different person who happens to live in the same body. The alchemists called this the rebis, the divine hermaphrodite, the perfect union of opposites. Not the elimination of conflict, but the integration of it. Not the conquest of the shadow, but the marriage with it. This is why shadow work is so much more radical than therapy or self-improvement. Those approaches assume stable self that needs adjustment. Shadow work assumes the self you think you are is the problem, and the solution is to let it die. David stood in the abandoned building where his startup used to operate, looking at the empty desks and wondering who the hell he had been trying to become. For 3 years, he'd worn the entrepreneur mask so convincingly that investors, employees, even his wife, believed he was born for this. The visionary who worked 18-hour days, not because he had to, but because he loved it. The leader who inspired loyalty through pure passion. The truth was simpler and more devastating. He'd started the company because he was terrified of working for someone else. Not because he was too visionary or too independent, but because authority figures triggered something primal and panicked in him. Every boss became his father. Every performance review became a judgment of his fundamental worth. Building a company had been his way of never having to feel small again. But now, with bankruptcy papers on his desk and 22 people losing their jobs, he couldn't avoid the question, who was he when he wasn't running from something? The months that followed were archaeological. In therapy, he excavated the 8-year-old who used to learn that being impressive was the only reliable way to earn love. The teenager who'd chosen every career path based on what would make his parents proud, rather than what actually engaged him. The young man who'd married someone who admired his ambition because it was easier than finding someone who loved his uncertainty. What emerged from this excavation wasn't pretty. David discovered he was deeply ambivalent about success. That part of him sabotaged every achievement because he didn't trust love that was earned rather than given freely. He found rage at parents who turned his childhood into a performance and shame that he'd been complicit in the deception. He uncovered a creative side that had been buried for decades under layers of pragmatism and strategy. The shadow work didn't to make him a better entrepreneur. It revealed that he never wanted to be an entrepreneur at all. What he wanted was to feel safe in the world, and building companies had been his elaborate way of building armor. 2 years later, David teaches high school history. His salary is a third of what he used to make, and he has never been happier. Not because teaching is his true calling, he was suspicious of that kind of thinking now, but because for the first time he is making choices from desire rather than fear. His marriage survived the transformation, not because they figured out how to love the old David, but because they discovered they'd both been performing versions of themselves that neither particularly liked. The abandoned building got torn down, eventually. David sometimes drives by the empty lot and marvels at how appropriate it is. Nothing left but space for something real to grow. Pause here and breathe. This isn't a row about diving into decades of therapy or dismantling your entire life overnight. Shadow work begins with one radical act, telling the truth about what you actually feel. Tonight, before you go to sleep, try this. Write for 10 minutes about something you pretend not to care about but actually do. Maybe it's a recognition at work. Maybe it's your appearance. Maybe it's whether people like you don't to try to fix it or understand it or make it noble. Just acknowledge it. Then write about something you pretend to care about but actually don't iati. A hobby you maintain because it makes you seem interesting. A goal you pursue because it sounds impressive. A relationship you maintain out of obligation rather than genuine affection. This isn't border T about judgment. It was about accuracy. You can T-integrate what you want and not acknowledge. You can how to transform what you want word or see. The goal isn't to become a different person overnight. It lowers to stop pretending to be someone you are or not. Because underneath all that pretending, someone real has been waiting their entire life for you to notice them. That someone is who you actually are. Shadow work isn't comfortable. It is not supposed to be. Comfort is what got you trapped in a life that doesn't quite fit, wearing a personality that feels like borrowed clothes. But here is what I know, after years of watching people go through this process, the person who emerges from shadow work isn't just happier, they more themselves than they know I've ever been. They make decisions from a place of authentic desire rather than unconscious fear. They build relationships based on genuine connection rather than mutual performance. They create lives that actually belong to them. Stop for a moment. Inhale, exhale. Feel the weight of the mask you re-wearing right now. Notice how tired you are from holding it in place. If this resonated with something deep inside you, something that it's been waiting to be acknowledged, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more insights into the hidden patterns that run your life, hit subscribe and join us for the next chapter of Becoming Real. The old you is already dying. The question is, what will you allow to be born?